The 21-22 NFL season. As the 2022-2023 season is about to start, I wanted to look back to the previous season and see how good or bad of an NFL season it was from an NFL fan's perspective. There were multiple good games, great moments, and whatever you want to call this. Ranging from the Chiefs-Bills divisional game to Joe Burrow leading a young Bengals team to the Super Bowl, and once again, whatever you want to call this. As a guy who watched most of the season and every single playoff game, I would like to go over how the season went, some specific topics or teams, the divisions, playoffs, and of course, the Super Bowl. Now, I have not seen every single NFL season that has ever been played, so my opinion isn't going to be perfect. But at the end of the day, it's just my honest opinion, and to me, I love football, so even if it was a pretty bad season, I would have still tuned in week and week out. And if you're a true NFL lover, I bet you have done the same. Also, if you have any recommendations on what I should talk about next time I overview a season, please let me know. Now, let's stop wasting any more time and get right into it. Hey, what's up guys, it's NFL Times here with another video. A different type of video today that I want to try out. Now, I would go over more about big trades and signings teams made before the season started in more detail. But I am trying to get this video out a couple days before the new season begins. I just don't want to post a video of the last season during a whole different season, so just keep that in mind. Enjoy the video. Let's start with the AFC East. To no surprise, the Jets finished last in the division, only managing to win 4 games. Surprisingly enough, 2 of the wins came from 2 playoff teams, the AFC South champions in Week 4 during overtime, and the AFC North champions in Week 8. They would lose 3 straight games on 3 separate occasions, from Week 1-3, 9-11, and 13-15. Overall, just a miserable season for this Jets team. The Dolphins were a weird team this year. Out of the first 8 games, they won 1 game. Yes, uno game, which would include 7 straight losses from Week 2 to Week 8. And then from Week 9 to Week 16, the Dolphins would not lose a single game. I'm telling ya, this team was weird. Although they had a 7-game win streak, they were still not considered that good of a team, and it was for one reason: their opponents. Their first 8 weeks, where they only won 1 game, they faced 5 playoff teams, and one of those teams they faced twice. Now the rest of the season, where they won 8 out of 9 games, they faced 2 playoff teams, and they lost against one of them. Basically, what I'm trying to say is most of the wins came from bum opponents, but they did all that to not even finish second in the division and miss out on the playoffs. After the first losing season since 2000, the Patriots came back with vengeance. We all know Bill Belichick, he ain't satisfied with anything that isn't a Super Bowl. So imagine him having to endure a losing season. After starting 2-4 and losing to Tom Brady. Tough. Just like the Dolphins, the Patriots went on a 7-game win streak, stretching from Week 7 to Week 13, and then had a bye week. Unlike the Dolphins, they actually won against some good teams, being the Chargers 27-24, Titans 36-13, and the Bills 14-10. But they went on to lose 3 out of their last 4 games of the season, 2 of them being division rivals. They would enter the playoffs as the 6th seed. Now, the winners of the AFC East, the Buffalo Bills. Since not being able to win the AFC East since 1995, they finally beat out the Patriots in the 2020 season. History will repeat itself this season. Josh Allen would keep his form and play at an extremely high level. After starting 4-2 and having their bye week, inconsistency is the award I would describe this Bills team midway throughout the season. They beat the Dolphins in Week 8, lost against the Jags in Week 9, beat the Jets in Week 10, lost to the Colts in Week 11, beat the Saints in Week 12, and then lost in back-to-back weeks. They would dismantle teams like the Saints and Jets, but then get destroyed by the Colts and lose to a quarterback who threw the ball 3 times. How? I have no idea. However, they would win their last 4 games and win the division with an 11-6 record, ending up as a 3rd seed. Moving on to the AFC North, a pretty competitive division. Out of all teams to finish last in it, I bet no one thought it would be the Ravens. After losing their first game, they would win their next 5 games, including beating the Chiefs in one hell of a primetime game. Then they got thrashed 41-17 by the Bengals. Even after getting destroyed, this Ravens team was still good, and by Week 12, they were 8-3 and were leading the division. The Ravens would then lose to the rival Steelers in Week 13, and then Lamar would get injured during their Week 14 game against the Browns, and the Ravens would fold after that. Tyler Huntley and Josh Johnson could not step up and fill in for Lamar, and the Ravens would not win another game for the rest of the season, ending up with an 8-9 record. The next team was the Browns, who finished with the same record. Yes, the team that got their first winning season since 2007 and their first playoff win since 1994 didn't even manage to get more wins than losses in this season. A real shame. Just a mediocre team, to be honest. They would win a game just to lose the very next, and that happened during week 6 through week 15. Many people would put the blame on one thing: this man. From leading the Browns to the first playoff win in 26 years to barely having more touchdowns than interceptions, I don't know what happened to Baker. I was a fan of the guy and was hoping he could take the Browns back to the playoffs, but he didn't even manage a winning record. Felt bad for them, to be honest. Second place would belong to the Steelers, who, fun fact, was one of the 2 teams that would tie this year. This team just refuses to have a losing record, this becoming the 18th straight season without a losing record. Honestly, probably one of the worst Steelers teams that I have ever watched. Not saying that they were a bad team, just saying that they were nowhere near as strong as they have been some years prior. I don't really understand how they got into the playoffs, but then I look at their opponents. Only 2 of their wins came from a team with a winning record, while every single one of their losses but 1 came from a team with a record above 500. Kinda like the Dolphins, they had quite an easy schedule. They would enter the playoffs as the 7th seed. The winners of this division would end up being the Bengals, their first division title since 2015. After only managing to get 4 wins the year prior, the Bengals would have more wins through 7 weeks than they had in their entire 2020 season. After heading into the bye week with a 5-4 record, they would go 5-3 in their last 8 games and win the division. Although not the best record, it got them the division title, so it was good enough. Now, I mentioned earlier that the division was competitive, and it was. The difference between the 4th place Ravens and the 1st place Bengals was only 2 wins. Crazy, honestly. Anyway, AFC South is up next. The AFC South, in my opinion, was the worst division throughout the 2021 season. The Jaguars, who had Trevor Lawrence, were just awful. They lost their first 5 games before getting the first win against the Dolphins, and after beating the Bills in Week 9 and Josh Allen destroying, ironically, Josh Allen, yes, you heard me correctly, they would lose 8 straight games before beating the Colts in the final week of the season. I will go more in detail in that game in just a bit. The 3rd place Texans weren't much better, managing to only get 1 more win, after Watson publicly said he wanted out, and well, we all know what kind of happened to that. Anyways, honestly, I liked how David Mills played. Although the media always downgrades them, I think he had a good season considering how bad of a team he had. Not much to say about this team, just a bad Texas team. Now, the Colts. After a 1-4 start, they would slowly but surely battle their way back, and by week 13 they had a 7-6 record. They would beat the Patriots and the Cardinals in back-to-back weeks, but then lose to the Raiders in week 17. Sitting at 9-7 as the 6th seed, the Colts just needed a win to clinch a playoff spot. Their opponent? The 2-14 Jaguars. Easy enough, right? Not really. The game would be at the Jaguars' home, and for the ones who don't know what this means, let me explain. The Colts have not beaten the Jaguars at home since 2014 and had 6 straight losses up to that point against the Jaguars at home. This game would make it 7. They would lose yet again, and it wasn't even close. A 26-11 loss eliminated them from the playoffs. Heartbreaking for Indianapolis fans. The winners of the division, the Titans, were just a good, consistent, all-around team. They would start 2-2 before going on a 6-game win streak. Even after losing Derrick Henry in Week 8, they went 6-3 without him. In my opinion, I think the team fell off a bit after the Week 11 loss to the Texans, where Ryan Tannehill threw 4 interceptions. But like I said, just a solid all-around team. Helps a bit that the division really wasn't much competition, but they would end up being the number 1 seed in the AFC, granting him a week's rest during the wildcard round. On to the AFC West. AFC West, and in my opinion, the best AFC division. The Denver Broncos would be the team to finish last in the division after a 3-0 start to questionable opponents. They would lose 4 straight games before beating Washington and surprising the league by beating the Cowboys, heading into the bye as a 5-5 team. And after a couple of weeks, they sat at 7-6 before losing their last 4 games, including losing to every AFC West team. Tough, honestly. This season would make the Broncos a team with the 2nd longest playoff drought, only behind the New York Jets. Next up is the Chargers. Heading into their bye week on a 4-2 record, this team, like multiple teams that I have talked about already, would hit a patch of form where they would win 1 week and lose the very next. They would break that streak, however, with back-to-back wins in Week 13 and Week 14, improving to an 8-5 record. They would then lose 3 out of the last 4 games and fail to reach the playoffs. Now, what's funny about this is in the Week 18 matchup against the Raiders, both teams were fighting for a wildcard spot. With the Steelers winning earlier that day, there were 3 scenarios. 1. The Raiders could win, eliminating the Chargers from the playoff race, meaning the Steelers would make it. 2. The Chargers could win, eliminating the Raiders from the playoff race, and once again the Steelers would make it. 3. The most unlikely of the 3, they could both tie, ensuring both of their spots in the playoffs and eliminating the Steelers. And with a minute left in overtime and the score being tied, the clock was ticking. Steelers fans all around the world were fuming, but with 38 seconds left and the clock still running, Chargers coach Brandon Stanley called a timeout. Why? The hell do I know? The Raiders would run it for 10 yards the very next play, making the field goal easy for the kicker. He made it and the Chargers were out of playoffs. The next team, ironically, eliminated them from the playoffs, the Raiders. After a 5-2 start, they hit a rough patch of form and had a losing record at one point in the season. Heading into Week 15 at 6-7, they would win their last 4 games and finish 10-7 and head into the playoffs as the 5th seed. Pretty decent all-around team, and the winners of this division, of course, was the Chiefs. This team low-key shocked the league early on in the season, but not in a good way. Through the first 7 weeks of the season, the Patrick Mahomes-led team had a 3-4 record. But for some reason, this team just always bounces back and went on an 8-game win streak. This streak would end in the hands of the Bengals. More on them too later. They beat the Broncos in the final game of the season to end 12-5 and into the playoffs with the 2nd seed. That's all of the AFC divisions. On to the NFC. NFC East. Not much to say about the last place Giants. 3-6 before the bye. Only 1 game after their bye week, which would include a 6-game losing streak to end off the season. Just an abysmal Giants season. Also, this season would also be their 5th straight year without a winning record. Next up is Washington. Also, just as a disclaimer, I'm not going to call them the Washington football team throughout the video. That's way too long, so I'm going to just call them Washington. This team really liked the number 4 this season, I guess. They started 2-2 before losing 4 straight games, and then they had their bye week. And after their bye week, they low-key had a good stretch of form, this time winning 4 straight games. But then once again, they would lose 4 straight games. They won their last game ending up 7-10. Like I said, they liked the number 4 this season. The 2nd place Eagles would start off the season 2-5 before going 4-2 in the next 6 games. After their bye week, they won 3 of their last 4 games and ended up with a 9-8 record and the 7th seed. Again, another team with an easy schedule. Only 1 out of the 9 wins came from a team with the winning record, and every loss they had but 1 was against a team with the winning record. So once again, bum opponents. The winner of this division, the Cowboys, would lose the first game before going on a 6-game win streak. This streak would end in the hands of the Denver Broncos. I don't know what it is about the Broncos, but the Cowboys cannot beat this team no matter how good or bad either teams are. Not a single win against the Broncos since 1995. Anyways, heading into Week 13 with 7 wins and 4 losses, they would win 4 straight games before losing to the Cardinals in Week 17 and ultimately blowing the Eagles out in the last week, heading into the playoffs as the 3rd seed. Let's head up more north. NFC North is up. The Lions would lose every game till finally in Week 13 they beat the Minnesota Vikings. They lost against the Broncos the week after their first win, but then they had, in my opinion, the biggest upset in the regular season when they beat the 10-3 Cardinals. That was like the only type of happiness Lions fans experienced this season. Let's move on to the Bears. They low-key had a decent start to the season, going 3-2 throughout the first 5 weeks. Then just everything went downhill, losing 5 straight games. They beat the Lions though, so at least good for them. Then they lost their next 3 games, but we don't gotta talk about that. Let's talk about the 2nd place team, the Vikings. This team was the definition of ups and downs. Like, just look at this. They would win 2 straight games and then lose 2 straight games. And this happened for basically the entire season, from Week 5 to Week 17. They ended up with a losing record, so I guess there were more downs than ups. Now, the winners of this division, the Packers. The Packers lost the first game, and I remember everyone overreacting, thinking the Packers were going to be trash. People stopped saying that after they won 7 games in a row. Then they won 4 of the last 5 games, and it helps with Rodgers, who had an MVP season. They would enter the playoffs with the number 1 seed. Not much to say, just one very good team being led by an MVP quarterback. This section is a bit shorter than most. This division was just kind of boring. Everyone knew the Bears and Lions weren't going to do anything, and the Vikings weren't much better. Anyways, let's go to the opposite of the North and go south. Panthers were like basically a Broncos from the NFC. They started 3-0 just like the Broncos due to questionable opponents. After the 3-0 start, they just folded, losing 4 in a row, and after Week 11, they did not win another game and ended the season with a 7-game losing streak. But according to Cam, next is the Falcons, who honestly were just a bad team. They didn't have a good start, starting 0-2. never really had a good stretch of form, only managing to get back-to-back wins just once, and then end the season well, losing 3 out of their last 4 games. Like I said, just a bad Falcons team. But at least they got some fire-ass jerseys, in my opinion at least. Second place belongs to the Saints, who had their first season without Drew Brees in 15 years. They had both a good and bad patch of form, starting 5-2 before losing 5 straight games from week 9 to week 13 to put them at 5-7. Then out of nowhere, won 4 games in the final 5 weeks and just barely missed out on the playoffs, finishing 9-8. And of course, the division winners were the Bucs, and to be honest, they never had competition from any other division. Won 6 out of 8 games before the bye, then won 7 out of the last 9 games, including a 4-game win streak and a 3-game win streak to end the season. Brady was just being Brady. The Bucs would go on to obtain the number 2 seed. Once again, not much to say about this division, to be honest. It was just so straightforward. Panthers sucked, Falcons sucked but not as bad, Saints were okay, and the Bucs dominated. On to the last division, the NFC West, and in my opinion, the best division in football this year. The only division to have 3 playoff teams. The only team to not make it was the Seahawks, who finished the season 7-10, the first losing season since 2011. A disappointing season for the team, losing 3 straight games on 2 different occasions and back-to-back losses on 2 different occasions this season. To be fair to them though, 4 out of their 7 wins would come from teams with a winning record, and 3 of them were to division rivals. One of 3 teams to make it to the playoffs in this division, the Niners, were just a good all-around team. After heading into their bye with a 2-3 record, they would slowly fight their way to a 6-6 record by week 13. They would win 4 of their last 5 games, including an OT win in the final week of the season. They would enter the playoffs as the 6th seed. The second team to make it to the playoffs in this division, the Cardinals, were the Super Bowl favorites early on to the season, and for good reason. They were the last team to be undefeated, and through 11 weeks they had won 9 and only lost 2. And it wasn't like they were beating bums as well. They destroyed the future AFC South champions, beat the Rams, and beat the Niners twice. This team was a force to be reckoned with throughout the first 13 weeks. And then 4 losses in their final 5 games destroyed this team, and the loss to the Lions, who had 1 win up to that point, set them back up a lot. And now the third and final team to go to the playoffs in this division, the Rams, won the division with a 12-5 record. They were kind of like the Cardinals, but they just never folded. They were 7-3 heading into the bye week and won 5 out of the 7 to close the season out, including a win against the Cardinals. A little fun fact, every single one of their losses would come in the hands of a playoff team. The AFC South and the NFC North champions, the Cardinals and the Niners twice. Now that we've gone through every team and division, let's move on to the playoffs. Wildcard weekend, 6 games. We'll start with the Bengals-Raiders games. The Bengals would get their first playoff win in 31 years, snapping an 8-game losing streak in the playoffs. The Raiders were looking to get their first playoff win since 2002, but I guess they'll have to wait. Next game was Bills-Patriots, and it wasn't even close. The Bills would even up the playoff series between these 2 rivals to 1-1, dismantling the Patriots 47-17. Just to update y'all, the Patriots beat the Bills in the 1963 playoffs, so... The Bucs would face off against the Eagles in the playoffs for the 5th time in their history, with the scoreline reading 2-2. This game made it 3-2 in favor of the Bucs when the Bucs would beat the Eagles 31-15. Niners-Cowboys, one of the best playoff rivalries of all time, have played 7 playoff games against each other up to that point, including 6 conference championship games and 1 divisional game. The Cowboys held the advantage with a 5-2 record, but the Niners would win this time by beating the Cowboys 23-17. The Chiefs and Steelers would match up in the very next wildcard game. Not much to see here. Chiefs handled business and blew the Steelers out 42-21. The Cardinals would complete their collapse and disappoint their fans by getting squashed 30-11 by the Rams. I was so disappointed in this Cardinals team. I thought they could have done so much better. Anyways, divisional round is up. The Bengals would shock the league and beat the 1-seed Titans after a pitiful performance by Ryan Tannehill. His first and last pass of the game were intercepted, the last one setting up the Bengals in position to move down the field and hit the game-winning field goal, which they did. Next up was, in my opinion, the biggest upset in this year's playoffs when the 6th-seed 49ers beat the 1st-seed Packers with a score of 13-10. Aaron Rodgers, probably one of his worst playoff performances in his career, and the Niners' defense and special teams playing at an elite level, they were able to send the Packers home. The Bucs would play the Rams in the next divisional game, and it wasn't even close midway through the 3rd quarter. The score reading 27 Rams, 3 Bucs. And like I said, not even close. What followed was 24 unanswered points by the Bucs, tying the game up with 42 seconds left. This time though, another white guy would come up with clutch. Not Brady, but his name was Cooper Kupp. He had 1 catch for 20 yards and another one for 44 yards, setting them up in prime field goal position. The Rams made it and eliminated the Bucks. The last game in the divisional round, and in my opinion the best game of the season, the Bills and Chiefs put on a show. 25 points scored in the final 2 minutes, Josh Allen hitting Gabriel Davis for 2 touchdowns, and of course Mahomes driving down the field in just 13 seconds, setting his kicker up to kick the field goal. And in overtime, the Chiefs won the coin toss and went on to win it all. This game would cause some controversy over the OT rules for the NFL. But anyways, on to the conference championship games. The Chiefs would enter the game as a 1-touchdown favorite and were winning 21-3 at one point. But I don't know what happened to this team and Mahomes, but if I'm being honest, the Bengals would have not had a chance in this game if the Chiefs didn't start crumbling. After leading 21-3 midway through the second quarter, they would give up 21 unanswered points and would not score another point into the final seconds of regulation time. And for those who don't believe me when I say that Mahomes had a poor second half of the game, let me just say this. The Chiefs won the coin toss just like they did against the Bills, but only this time Mahomes didn't do any magic. Instead, he threw that interception that knocked them out of the playoffs. I don't know what happened to him, but something wasn't right about him, and you could tell. Anyways, on to the second and last conference championship game, the Rams and Niners. Division rivals and the greatest teams in the division have only met each other once in playoffs before, with the Niners beating the Rams 30-3 in 1989. It took 21 minutes for the first points to be scored when the Rams would score a touchdown. The very next drive, the Niners would score their first point, scoring a touchdown. The Niners would add on 3 points to end the half 10-7. Surprisingly, the Niners would go up 17-7 with the Kittle touchdown. The Rams would tie the game up midway through the fourth quarter, and then Matthew Stafford would drive the field and get a field goal, and the Niners would not be able to answer, making this year's Super Bowl Bengals-Rams. Super Bowl 56, the Cincinnati Bengals and the Los Angeles Rams. I don't know why, but to me this was such a weird Super Bowl matchup. It's just, I don't know. But anyways, not the point. On to the game. The Rams would open up the score with a touchdown by Odell Beckham, who had a clean moonwalk. Then the Bengals would kick a field goal before giving up another touchdown to go down 13-3. But then the Bengals would answer right after this with the Joe Mixon and T. Higgins touchdown. The first half would end, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Eminem pulled up onto the second half. The first play of the second half was a touchdown, a 75-yard bomb from Burrow to T. Higgins with questionable refereeing. After a Stafford interception, the Bengals would add on 3 points to extend their lead to 7. Rams would add on a field goal in the third quarter, and 13 minutes to the fourth quarter, there were no points scored till Stafford would throw another touchdown a cup to get the lead back. The Bengals had 1 minute and 25 seconds to do something, and on the Rams' 49-yard line with 43 seconds left, Joe Burrow would snap the ball and add Chase for a wide open throw. But Aaron Donald would not let his team lose another Super Bowl. If this O-line gives Burrow 1 more second, I think there's a good chance the Bengals are the Super Bowl champions. But that's a what if. And just like that, the Rams are the winners of Super Bowl 56. Cooper Kupp would win Super Bowl MVP and the Rams would join the 2 Super Bowl group. And that's that. The 21-22 season. Although the regular season was good with many good games and teams, it's the playoffs that really stood out to me and probably to most NFL fans this season. Although not the greatest games in the wild card, the rest of the playoffs were great and one of the best postseasons I have ever watched. The divisional round had 3 game-winning field goals with no time left on the clock, and the only game to not do so was an overtime game that ended with a touchdown. The 4 divisional games were decided by a combined total of 15 points with an average margin of 3.8 points per game. That margin was the lowest average margin of victory in NFL playoff history and a round with at least 4 games. I loved watching these 4 games that went that in, brother. It was so much fun. The conference championship games were great as well, with both games only being decided by 3 points. And of course the Super Bowl, which was quite controversial due to refereeing, but despite all of that, it was a great Super Bowl. And there you have it, the 21-22 season. One of my favorite seasons to watch, and I hope that the 22-23 season can match. Just as a side note, I tried to get this video out before the first NFL game of the new season, but I just couldn't. Too much school and I was just way too tired. But at least it's before the first NFL Sunday of the season. Thank you very much. Y'all tell me how much y'all enjoyed or despised this season down in the comments. Thank you for staying all the way till the end. It was a bit longer video, so thank you. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Take care, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace out.